So the first thing that I'm going to ask all of you to do is to participate along with me by visiting slido.com, slido.com, and entering the code 854-6480. So I'll go ahead and put that in the chat window too, slido.com. And again, the code is 854-6480. In addition, if you would like the handout for today's presentation, please visit tiny.utk.edu/empower adult learners, and I'm also putting that in the chat window. First thing that I want to do is ask you a question. So on Slido, when you think of adult learners, what's one word that comes to mind? And you're more than welcome to enter one word and then enter another word and then enter another word, but please just do it one word at a time. You can respond as many times as you want, but again, one word at a time. So I'm watching to see when it looks like we've got quite a few of you that have responded. Are you guys seeing the word cloud that's appearing on the screen? Awesome. Awesome. So it looks like busy, experienced, determined, overloaded, too many responsibilities, passion, serious, diverse, different, resilient, professional, self-directed, non-traditional, but busy definitely stands out. And since everybody in this room, in my opinion, ought to consider themselves an adult learner, hopefully a lifelong learner, I suspect many of you can relate to every single one of these terms in terms of how you feel right now as a learning facilitator. I imagine you also struggle, just like our learners do, especially our adult learners, with all of these characteristics. So one of the things that I would like to do is try to spend a little bit of time helping you appreciate what it is that we know about adult learners. And the good news is many of the characteristics that you shared are indeed real characteristics that are supported by evidence that do depict, on average, our adult learners. So one of the things that we know about our adult learners is that they are highly motivated. In fact, when you've got an adult learner in your on-campus course, or even in your online course, they often are huge assets to have in your course because they, in many ways, inspire some of our young adults to be a little more motivated. If you really dig into the scientific literature, what you discover is that our adult learners are self-determined. They're gritty. They're hopeful. And probably most importantly to their success at the university, they are persistent. They certainly aim to be persistent. But one of the things that we have to also recognize is that when you dig deep and you look at the scientific literature, what you find is that our adult learners and our young adult learners are often unskilled and challenged learners. So what that means is at the adult level, we're lucky. They're ready to learn to learn. Unfortunately, at the young adult level, they often are quite naive and expect that the way that they learned in high school is the way that they ought to continue to learn in college. And they're very resistant to consider alternative ways of studying, staying motivated, and more, at least initially. In part, that has a lot to do with an immature executive system, a prefrontal cortex that probably won't mature until their late 20s. So we are blessed when we have our adult learners because they're ready to learn to learn. When I offer workshops, they're there. They are experienced and knowledgeable, which is really important if you're going to consider trying to help somebody learn to learn and be successful. Because all learning is basically connecting new information to prior knowledge. And our experienced adult learners, they come with boatloads of relevant experience and knowledge that they can use to try to create those important hooks that help them build new understandings, build more complicated and nuanced connectomes, neural connections. They're also quite practical, which means they really want to know why it is that they need to learn what you're asking them to learn. And they're less impressed with knowledge. They're more impressed with skill. They're more impressed with opportunities to apply what they learn to real world problems, to their life, to their career, which is an awesome thing because when we do that, we're more likely to learn. They're also very diverse, so it's important to recognize that our adult population come to us with a variety of prior experiences, a variety of career interests, a variety of important demographic characteristics, and more. One of the things that I find especially interesting about our adult learners is they recognize good curriculum. And with that comes not only the design of the curriculum, but also the delivery of the curriculum. The other thing I would say is just like us, they're trying to do the best they can. And just like us, they benefit from care and compassion and kindness. So I want to take a moment and kind of walk through some of these characteristics. And as you think about them, I want you to consider how you might leverage these assets, these strengths that they bring, and also adjust and adapt your curriculum so that you can help them follow through on that enthusiasm to learn by providing them direct instruction, direct support so that they can learn how to learn, so that they can share and benefit from their experiences and their knowledge, so that they can apply what they learn, so that they can be included in your course, so that they can help you improve your curriculum, and ultimately help all of us think about the value of recognizing we're all doing the best we can and we all can benefit from compassion and kindness. So the first thing that I want to make clear is everything I'm sharing is based on scientific research. And so ultimately we have to remember that research is probabilistic. So it's fair to always recognize that on average, adult learners are already self-determined or they're eager to learn to be self-determined. And for those of you who are not familiar with self-determination theory, in my opinion, it's one of the most evidence-based theories there is. Literally thousands of studies suggest that if you want to really encourage learners to learn for its own sake, to learn for the purpose of mastery, to learn for the purpose of using what they learn and making a difference, self-determination, sometimes referred to as intrinsic motivation, is absolutely essential. And the ABCs of self-determination are basically autonomy, belongingness, and competence. Now, the researchers Ryan and Deci have spent an awful lot of time. There's even an annual conference devoted simply to this theory. But one of the things that they've showed across multiple studies is that if we can help enhance a student's autonomy, their willingness to be the agent for their life, to be the decision maker in their life, if we can help them feel a sense of relatedness or belongingness, feeling like they really belong in the academic community, that the people that they're studying with are their people, and if they can have a sense of self-efficacy or competence, that's going to be one of the biggest drivers of their motivation. And so we're kind of blessed. This is exactly how many adult learners come to us. They are eager to be the agent in their life. They made an intentional choice to do that, to come back to school. They are eager to feel a sense of belonging on our campus and notice when they don't feel it. And they're eager to continue to feel a sense of confidence that they can be successful, that they can do it. So one of the things that we learn from self-determination theory is that there's a variety of reasons why people might be at the university, might be attempting to learn. Unfortunately, one of the things that we see is as we age, we tend to become more autonomous, more self-directed, more self-determined learners. That the reasons we do things tend to be more thought out, supported by deeper reflection and metacognition. But unfortunately, when we look at a lot of our younger adults, they kind of come here focused on extrinsic motivators. And sadly, some might even come without motivation. So as you look at this spectrum, you can probably acknowledge that sometimes there are students that are just going through the motions. Sometimes there are students that are doing it for the big D, the degree. Sometimes they're doing it because they think they should or their parents think they should. Sometimes they're doing it for more autonomous reasons, initially maybe because it's consistent with some goals. Hopefully, over time, we can help our students feel that it's part of their identity, that being a learner, being successful at the higher education setting is something that's really valuable to them and one of the valuable roles that they play in life and something that they really feel is critical. And then finally, we hope that they get to the point of self-determination. If you look at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that typically when you have extrinsically motivated, controlled, kind of motivated students, you start to see not only some of those positive emotions that they arrive on campus with, but also when they experience challenge and struggle, a lot more anxiety, fear of failure, an unstable self-esteem, inner conflict, and a loss of contact with who they really are. When you look at students who are autonomously motivated, who are self-determined, you see a lot of positive characteristics that really can be infectious in our classrooms. So I think we ought to all welcome our adult learners and do the most we can to really integrate them, help them feel like they belong, to honor and respect their autonomy, just like we want to have our autonomy honored and respected, and ultimately to value trying to make sure that those students retain their high sense of self-confidence and self-efficacy that they can be successful. So, excuse me, 1 second, I want to ask you guys another question. I want you to think back to your own undergraduate experiences and reflect on those 3 characteristics that really do define self-determination: a sense of autonomy, a sense of belongingness, a sense of competence. And I'm curious because I hear all the time when faculty and staff and older adults come to my workshops that they wish they had known some of the things that really would help them be successful, including these characteristics of self-determination. So I'm curious, when you reflect on your younger undergraduate self, do you see yourself as more self-determined now than you were as an undergraduate? And can you recognize basically the impact that that might have had on your success and your deep learning? Do you see yourself about as self-determined now as you were as an undergraduate? Or do you see yourself less self-determined now? Just want to see if your results are consistent with what we typically find. It looks like 8 of you so far have responded. Love to see even more of you respond. So I'm going to go ahead and share what we're seeing so far. Most of you recognize that you are at least as self-determined as you were as an undergraduate. But it's quite interesting to see that there are quite a lot of you who recognize right away that you were far more self-determined now as an adult than you were as a young adult. I can certainly agree with that myself. I didn't even really appreciate that there was such a thing as self-determination or self-directed learning when I was younger. And if you really think about it, much of the education that we were probably all exposed to was other-directed. Strongly lecture-based, with us sitting quietly, trying to capture all those notes and then memorize everything for exams. Curiously, there's some of us that might even feel less self-determined now as adults. And so that really gets at the fact that research is probabilistic. On average, self-determination improves with age, but certainly for some of us, we might feel like we lose that sense of self-determination as life progresses. Now, the other thing that I wanted to share is that on average, adult learners are far more gritty than our young adult learners. Now, all of us are gritty. I want to make that clear. All of us can probably think of circumstances, even as a young adult, that really help us appreciate that we had a sense of grit, which is really a sense of passion and a sense of perseverance for challenging long-term goals. Now, it might not have been gritty for learning, but for some of us, we had to be gritty just to simply survive. As a first-generation college student who grew up in a single-parent home in poverty, I certainly had a lot of grit. But did I have grit as a learner as a young adult? No, not really. I certainly was willing to put in the hard work, but grit is far more than hard work. It's not simply effort. When you really think about the components that make a person gritty and that really come to us as we age, they include not only an interest in being here at the university, but an informed interest, a more realistic interest, an intrinsic interest, a true value for all that we could learn and the impact it could have for our life. In addition, as we age, we start to better appreciate the sense of purpose that's really important to ignite our passion. So ultimately, when you think of purpose, you think of having a sense that our being here at the university is aligned with our interests, our strengths, our goals, our values, our service, and that it's supported by a deeper vision. Like we have a series of sub-goals. We really appreciate the depth and breadth of the kinds of things we're trying to accomplish. In addition, older adults tend to recognize that if you're going to learn anything, you have to engage in deliberate practice. Now, I would say our athletes on campus definitely learn that through the coaching that they go through, but I worry sometimes that in higher education, we lose that sense of helping young adults really learn how to engage in that deeper form of deliberate practice that requires them to step outside their comfort zone, to establish specific goals to continue to improve, to remain intensely focused as they attempt to learn and practice, and probably most importantly, to seek the help of a coach, somebody who knows what excellence looks like and is willing to help. The other thing that you see that's a key component of grit is greater self-control. So as the prefrontal cortex, the very front of our brain, I like to refer to it as our inner Yoda, matures, we certainly get far better at being able to put off now some of the impulsive things that we want to do that are certainly way more fun than learning in order to accomplish our more longer term goals. So think of grit as basically a mindset that you're in a marathon, not a sprint. I often see many of our younger adults think of themselves as more in a sprint, a series of sprints, a series of all-nighter memorizing sessions, things like that. So I'm curious, when you think about your own grit, what do you think? Especially your grit to learn, your grit to dive deeper, to really master the things that you're attempting to understand and use in your life. Do you see yourself as more gritty now with respect to learning than when you were an undergraduate? Do you see yourself about as gritty now as you were as an undergraduate? Or do you see yourself less gritty now than when you were an undergraduate? So as you all respond, we'll all see the results. You can see it's still kind of going to fluctuate a little bit. We're still getting more and more people to respond. Kind of starting out the same way we did with self-determination, with a split between those who say they're more gritty now and those who say they're about as gritty now as they were as an undergraduate. Again, what I often hear from older faculty when they come to my workshops is, I wish I had known all this stuff. Because we can do specific things to help our students be more gritty. We can help students be more interested by making more relevant, more practical, more useful. We can help our students develop that sense of passion and purpose. We can certainly teach our students how to engage in the difficult, deliberate practice that's required to learn anything, to master anything. And certainly we can incorporate opportunities for students to learn self-control in our classes. So clearly more of you see yourself grittier now than you were as an undergraduate. So think of the blessing that we have when we have adult learners in our class who come in gritty. They can be role models. They can certainly get involved in maybe some peer support activities in your class, and you can take advantage of all that they know. Another characteristic that leans in on the motivation that you see in adult learners is hope. To me, a sense of hope is one of the most important characteristics that adults bring. When adults come back to school, it's driven by hope. It's driven by the opportunity that an education might provide for them to advance on their job, for them to gain important skills, to earn more, to be able to have a better life. Sometimes our younger adults, they don't get that. They're so focused on the extrinsic, the pay, the prestige, that they don't really appreciate the long-term benefits that come to your family, that come to others, that come to yourself as a result of higher education. But clearly, most of our adults on average do. Just last night, just to kind of test this out, I've been working with a personal trainer now for 6 months who dropped out of college after 1 semester. And I asked, do you ever think about going back to college? And he indicated that he did. All the time. When students that are adults make a decision to come back to college, it's usually because they're now holding 4 beliefs. When you look at people that are highly hopeful, they believe that the future could be better than their present, that ultimately they have the power to make it so. They understand that there's many paths to their goals. They're willing to explore all those, and they willingly appreciate that all of the pathways that they take are not going to be free of obstacles. One of the things that the literature on hope suggests is that we spend far too much effort focusing on willpower, on trying to help students develop a sense of agency and a sense of self-efficacy. But when you think of what really helps people remain hopeful, it's way power. It's a willingness to recognize that there are multiple paths that they may have to take, that there are obstacles along all the ways. Think of it as basically influenced by grit, this willingness to persevere and try new ways. And that's one of the things that you will see in our adult learners. They are eager to ask for help. They are eager to attend sessions where they could learn how to be better. They want to be successful. This really matters to them. So here's another one that I'm curious about. When you think about yourself, again, as an undergraduate and now, and you think about the level of hope that you have that if you put in the effort, if you ask for help, if you make the right choices along the way, you can be successful in the things that you endeavor to accomplish, including getting a college degree, learning more, taking on challenges. So I'm curious, if you reflect on your younger self and you really think about those 4 necessary components, to what extent are you as hopeful as you were as a young adult, or are you more hopeful now than you were as a younger adult? So far, we're seeing a pattern that suggests that many of us are just like those returning adults. More hopeful now than we were as an undergraduate. I suspect all of us wax and wane a little bit. Appreciate that there are a lot of factors that influence our sense of hope. But I suspect that many of us have taken on a sense of agency, a sense of knowing that there's not one true path to accomplishing anything. You got to try different things. Unfortunately, sometimes our young adults are quick, as soon as they feel negative emotions, to procrastinate, to put off, to start a cycle that results in them beginning to go into a downward spiral. And that's really sad to watch if you teach freshmen. because what you see is these excited students on day one, for the most part, and then you start to see some students seem to lose their will. And part of it is they don't really appreciate the way power and how we can help them adjust strategies, adjust help seeking, adjust things that could make them more persistent. The final thing that I shared that really is critical for our adult learners is that on average, our adult learners are hopeful. And I shared with you first an appreciation for the hope theory, the 4 characteristics that really influence hope. But now I want to talk about persistence. When you look at adults, it's hard to really appreciate this sometimes without looking at the data, but on average, our adults are far more persistent. They're far more likely to hold beliefs that are going to help them remain productive and persistent as a learner. Things that we often refer to as an academic mindset, a scholar mindset. Our older adults tend to be more likely to have a growth mindset, to believe that they can actually learn and change. They tend to seek out and value and aim to accomplish a sense of belonging. I see that whenever I go to the transfer panels and see some of our older adults. They are eager to find out about the clubs, about the ways that they can feel part of the community at UT. They're more self-efficacious. They believe they can succeed, and they believe that what they're doing, learning, mastering things, is of value. So again, I challenge you, think back to yourself as an undergraduate. Are you now more persistent than you were as an undergraduate? Are you about as persistent as you were, or are you less persistent? If you're consistent with the typical, I suspect you're more persistent now. And in fact, you probably invest a lot of energy if you're a parent trying to help your own children, your own adolescents really persist, really think about their mindset, think about their attitudes about learning and more. Many times you can recognize some of the worries you have about our students simply by looking at some of these things that really are critical for success. And having this kind of persistence mindset is really important. So let's take a peek. As we keep seeing over and over again, we're just like our students, our adult students. We can recognize that we struggle a little bit to be as persistent as we are now when we were younger. And I bet you we can all recognize a lot of ways that others might have influenced us, might have helped us. Some of you can even imagine, this can be really scary at times, but imagine what it would have been like to try to have a conversation with your younger self about being more persistent, about these characteristics. We have to really be delicate the way we have those conversations. And it's important to recognize all these characteristics. Now, there's one caution that I want to make. All of these characteristics that adult learners have, they're awesome. They put them in the arena where they can be successful. They have the energy, the passion, the willingness to keep going, to try new ways, to ask for help. But the one thing that we have to be careful of is that motivation can go sour pretty quickly if they don't get direct help doing the work of learning. If they don't appreciate that successful learning is far more than effort, it's far more than asking for help, it's far more than being patient, it's far more than being hopeful and persistent. Ultimately, we want to use all those characteristics to help them learn successfully, to employ the most effective and efficient strategies to learn. In my opinion, our focus right away should be to honor the fact that they're super motivated and marry that up with a concerted effort to show them exactly how to go about the work of learning. And I suspect some of you, if you could go back, would have loved to have had that kind of exposure so that you didn't waste a lot of time doing things that are very ineffective, but can take a lot of time, like rereading and highlighting as many parts of the text as you can so that you can try to focus on memorizing them later, pulling all-nighters, and more. So one of the things that I really like to think of when I think of our adult learners is they've got 4 of 5 often of the characteristics that we really need. I would argue that we see fewer of these characteristics when we look at our young adult learners. They know that if they're going to be successful, they got to find a way to put in the effort, and they're willing to do that. They need our flexibility so that they can make that happen, but they're eager to put in the effort. They're eager to ask for help. They're the ones that are going to show up at office hours. Those are the ones who are going to ask for help. Those are the ones who are hopeful. Those are the ones that are patient. But what we can do is help them actually employ the right strategies, which I summarize as teaching them to think, which means to deeply process when they learn, to be focused on mastery when they learn, and to aim to attain a sense of accurate metacognition, to be well aware of when they're actually engaging in deep processing, when their strategies are working, when they're actually learning. That means being willing to have a smart pace, because thinking deeply, thinking metacognitively is not something you can do in marathon sessions. We best learn across multiple intervals, just like athletes who stress, then rest, stress, then rest. And then we also want to encourage them to test themselves well ahead of the assessments that we give them, to employ regular retrieval practice, trying to call to mind what they're learning without the benefit of their book and notes as often as they can. Those are the things that are going to really help them take the 4 assets they bring and really excel. So I'm curious now, when you think about yourself as an undergraduate learner, which of these necessary components of skilled learning were your weaknesses as an undergraduate? You can mark as many as you want. I can tell you, for me, effort was my strength. I was willing to work hard, and unfortunately work so hard that I put aside and neglected to engage in a ton of really cool activities that would have been a lot of fun. Because unfortunately I was focused on things that aren't that helpful in the long run. So I'd spend hours upon hours rereading text and underlining and highlighting my books and staring at stuff and hoping that it would somehow leap off the page and come into my mind and I could memorize it just in time to regurgitate it for exams. That's the essence of our shallow but strategic learners. They recognize that if they can fill their brain up with, content and memorize it, even if it's only in short-term memory, and get a good grade, well, at least I get the good grades. They're not necessarily thinking about lasting learning. And if you look at the literature on the transfer of our learning and the stability and the ability of our learning to last, you'd be quite shocked. There's a lot of literature that shows that just over the summer break, you see a dramatic drop in how students would do on the same final exam that they might have aced. And within a year or two, you've got students that not only forgot most of the major concepts in your class, they forgot they even took your class. They have to be reminded sometimes. So I'm curious, as we look at this, what is it? Well, I'm not surprised that the number one is help seeking. Despite the fact that I worked incredibly hard, and I can tell it's not your weakness either, I never once across the 4 years, even though I could have benefited from it a lot, went to an office hour, went to a study center like our Vol study centers. And that's pretty common. If you look at our attendance at some of our events, it's really hard sometimes to get students to appreciate that they could benefit from help. And so we have to go out of our way. Patience. I think a lot of our students expect that if they fail, that's an indicator that they should quit, they should drop. So they're not very patient. And strategy. I'm glad that many of you recognize that strategy was a weakness. I suspect the more you learn about how we learn best, the more likely you might be to endorse that strategies might have been a problem, a weakness. One of the things about adult learners is they are ready to learn. They might not be skilled, but they are eager to learn, and they are eager to come to workshops, to go to office hours, to talk to you and get help, especially if you communicate that you're approachable and you're willing to help them engage in deliberate practice and learn how to learn. They're ready to think. They're ready to space their work, to distribute their work, and they're ready to engage in retrieval practice. Now, if you want to try to incorporate some things into your course that would really help your students do this even better, especially your younger students or those older students who are motivated but need this kind of help, I strongly encourage you to check out the really brief but just awesome book, Ace That Test. It's available on the UTK libraries. It's written by a series of cognitive psychologists and learning scientists. Everything that I share in my workshops is part of that book. I certainly spend a time focused on a lot of other things, but I would strongly encourage you to think about how it is that you could go about incorporating many supportive lessons that show students how to actually be successful and ace your course. And keep that as at the forefront. Keep learning at the forefront instead of focusing on grades. So I'm curious, when you think about yourself as a learner, to what extent did you actually engage in those key learning strategies, deep processing, and an effort to reflect continuously, to monitor your own behavior, adjust your strategies, and really make sure that you're actually learning? To space your work, to study a little bit most days instead of trying to study in marathon sessions, and to, probably more importantly, engage in regular retrieval practice, making sure that it's challenging practice that requires you to produce evidence that you actually know it by not simply saying it in your head, but saying it out loud or in writing to confirm that you've got this stuff in memory. So let's see how we do, but right now we've got some sometimes and some rarely. I suspect if we were really honest, we were our students. And why is it that this cycle continues? We just all keep being those students. How can we actually change that and break that cycle? Who's willing to step in and recognize that we need to do far more than, help our students have a good time when they come to Welcome Week? That we need to really spend some serious time focusing on the skills, not just telling them, but helping them practice these skills deliberately and learn how to actually learn. To me, it's a moral imperative. We're lucky that we have students that are adults that are willing to be super motivated, but it's our job to really try to help all of our students be successful by showing them how to actually learn. So, to what extent? This is a tough one, but I challenge you to think about this because this is what I think about all the time, and trust me, I'm not there at almost always. To what extent are you really providing curriculum, designed curriculum, deliver that curriculum in a way that encourages students to routinely think, space, and test, to use those wise strategies? This is what makes it difficult to have those fire hose lectures that we sometimes have. Because if we really want our students to learn, we're going to go at a pace that's going to help them really deeply process, really learn how to reflect as they attempt to learn how to space that work, and we can certainly structure our curriculum so that that happens, and learn how to engage in regular retrieval practice instead of what we're seeing, which is an increasing number of students who have test anxiety. We need students to welcome tests, to love the opportunity to see what they know. That comes with our adult learners. In fact, they're ready and willing to point out when your tests aren't fair, too. So take a peek, and what you see is quite a number of you that feel pretty confident. Some of you that are willing to say, sometimes. I challenge you to ask your students that. I challenge you to really meet, especially your adult students, because they will know, and they will be willing to tell you directly if you're really doing that. One of the things that we have to be careful of is teaching is far more than presenting. We have to be worried about what's called the curse of knowledge. Many times when we share things, we forget how difficult it was for us to learn it initially. And so we present it as if this is going to be easy. In fact, it can just be a single bullet on a slide. When in reality, to really help people understand, we've got to go deep. We have to really beware those fire hose lectures, those lectures where what we're doing is emphasizing memorization, because there's no way somebody could completely understand all that you covered in that single day. That's really critical. Now, one of the other cool things about our adult learners that I shared is that they come experienced and knowledgeable. That is an asset. One of the things that makes it difficult for some of our younger adults to learn is they don't yet have all those experiences that they can use as hooks to some of the new things that we're teaching them. In fact, we have to go out of our way to really help them find the right connections, find the right concrete examples, and to appreciate the need to elaborate, to ask questions, to try to go deeper, to understand things, instead of just stopping at memorizing isolated terms and facts. Much of that focus on memorization started in high school, and those young adults will be glad to tell you, and those older adults, that's what they remember. And so we have to help them, and we have to value their prior knowledge. The other thing about adults is that they are practical. They're going to be quick to point out when they find what you're sharing irrelevant. It's not something that they can recognize right away. It could be useful to them. It's not something that they might be interested in. It's not something that they feel concerned about. Now, it's a little different than our young adults. Our young adults struggle to even know what it is that they ought to be concerned about. They need more relevant, practical curriculum probably more than anyone. But the good thing about our older adults, our adult learners, is they know right away that they need to connect with their learning to what they already know, and that they're hoping to use what you teach them to advance and grow. Another thing that you need to appreciate is that all learners are diverse. As the UDL faculty fellow in OIT, I spend a lot of time trying to help us appreciate that our curriculum should bend and flex so that we can help all students, regardless of their backgrounds and level of motivation, engage. I'm arguing we could use our adult learners to help with that. In addition, we have to represent what we're trying to teach, what we're trying to help people master in as many ways as we can, using a variety of examples, a variety of contexts to really help our students find the right connections for themselves. And we also need to make sure that when we're looking for evidence that students are learning, that we recognize that our students vary in how they might be able to best demonstrate that they're actually learning. And for our adult learners, they're probably going to want assignments that are more authentic. And I would argue that for our young adult learners, more authentic, non-multiple choice kind of exam assessments are going to be more likely to produce greater interest. Now, if you struggle with trying to make sure your students can do one of those things, I would certainly encourage you to ask them to attend my workshops. And I'm happy to share what I teach with any of you. But I would say that it really behooves all of us to think about how we can help transform our potentially motivated adults, eager to learn, into successful learners, and how we can do the same for our young adult learners. Now, as we approach the end of today, I want to touch on a couple of really sensitive topics. The first one is that our adults recognize good curriculum. And I really like this quote. It comes from the book that we're reading in the Lifelong Learning Book Club right now, The New Classroom. If a plant is not faring well, the caretaker may, as a very last resort, attribute the outcome to a failure to identify how to facilitate the plant in thriving, but not to a failure on the part of the plant itself. I believe that sometimes we kind of have a knee-jerk response to blame our students when they're not successful. I think it's important for us to recognize that it's our job to facilitate learning. And so when students aren't successfully learning, that's a problem that we can try to solve. Now, I recognize that there are a whole host of biological, psychological, and social cultural challenges that people face, but we should be the first to really want to try to solve the problems, not just label it, because we're the ones in the front lines that are actually doing the facilitation of learning. The other thing that I want to really make sure to communicate loud and clear is I think adults, all adults, you and I, and our adult learners are doing the best they can. If any of you have ever seen the movie The Answer Man, there's a scene in that where one of the characters, young lady, says, one of the characters, the gentleman here, says, "I'm sorry about when we met. I didn't know you were having such a hard time." And the response from the young lady is, "So you're only awful to people who don't have problems. That's good to know." You set the tone. And so when you have students that are struggling, the way you react to that can really make a huge difference. I suggest that you ally with our students, show them that you care and that ultimately your long-term goal is that they learn, that you do everything you can to influence and guide them so that they can be successful as a learner and that you model it yourself. That comes with listening, understanding, validating, connecting, not correcting. I really like this particular slide. I suspect most of us recognize that in our own life and appreciate when other people are not so quick to judge and are willing to slow down and just connect with us. But I think sometimes we get busy and we maybe don't think that these are young people, or in the case of our adult learners, these are people who really have a hopeful dream. And we can do all we can to really connect with them, meet them where they're at, and really help them be successful. If there was one dream, I would come back sometime and talk only about motivational interviewing. Because if any of you want to learn skills that are really going to help you connect with our students, motivational interviewing is going to be it. You will learn quite quickly that no one is unmotivated. All of us experience ambivalence and wax and wane, and all of us struggle to accomplish things that we really would like to accomplish. We have to be aware as faculty of pretending to be the expert and taking that stance as an authority and trying to tell people what to do. To not be willing to slow down so that we can really help our students learn. To remember to not simply wander, but to think about how you can help focus some of the students' efforts on a pathway that can help them succeed. And certainly avoid the approach of trying to just persuade people. We need to collaborate more with our students. Slow down, ask instead of tell, listen, guide. Ask what our students think is best and really kind of work with them. By the way, we are our students. If you think about all the things that help us excel and learn, I suspect most of you would be quick to recognize that we flourish when we have someone giving us empathy and understanding, when we have a holistic psychosocial approach, when we have a safe, diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment, when we have a series of positive relationships with our students and others. And all of these characteristics are things that we're kind of the leader in our classroom. So we can prioritize those things. Now, I just want to share a quick example for you to think about. Imagine that you've got an adult learner who's working 2 jobs, has young children, their car broke down, they were recently passed over for a promotion. They email you insisting that you made a grading mistake and they want to talk about their exam grade. And they're a little rude, they're a little disrespectful. They suggest that you're not being fair because you don't let them see what they missed on their exam. Now, this is a real case. And you've got a couple of options, but I've kind of shared with you the extremes. On one extreme, you could immediately have a knee-jerk impulsive reaction where you basically break the bond you have with your student and not really help them grow. Or you can recognize that this student cares about learning and you can try to help problem solve. Sometimes we do things that really stop people from being successful, that provide obstacles and challenges to people. In fact, I suspect all of you can think about negative academic experiences. And if you have a young adult go to college, you will definitely hear about some of the times where they get messages that are not supportive of their learning. So we have to remember there's a whole bunch of reasons why people might be struggling, especially our adult learners, but technically all of our learners, because in many respects, that's what they're like now. Just like that.
Dr. Bob, we are about at 1 o'clock.
Yep, and that's my last slide. So I really, really appreciate all of you. I hope that you found this helpful. If you'd like to talk more about any of this, please don't hesitate to meet with me. Be happy to talk with you more about this, to share even more. And I would love to come back sometime and talk about motivational interviewing. So take care. I really appreciate you all. I'll stick around in case you have any questions.